We just need to look over the North Sea to Norway, a country smaller than Scotland, which by every account has run the most successful oil and gas industry in the world. Not just successful for the businesses, for employment, but of course have built up an investment fund for the Norwegian people of £450 billion, about £100,000 a head for every man, woman and child in Norway. In contrast, the Westminster government over these last 40 years have just swallowed up all of Scotland's North Sea oil and gas revenues.
Regretted very much that the UK hadn't done something similar to what Norway had done in the 80s, and also Dennis Healy, who quoted last year saying that there was effectively a cover-up by the UK government back in the 70s and 80s to prevent the people of Scotland, through the Macron report, etc., from understanding how much value the North Sea oil reserves were bringing into Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there are other industries. Scottish whisky, for one, is huge around the world.
That's correct. But you've got to remember that Scottish GDP without oil is the same size as the UK's GDP per head. So the oil industry to Scotland is really a bonus on top of a very strong range of other sectors we've got. Whisky, you mentioned, food and drink in its totality, manufacturing, tourism, financial services. There's many, many industries that are strong within Scotland. So the oil and gas revenues are additional to that. And there's 2 points there really. First of all, the reason that oil and gas revenues have been fluctuating over the last few years isn't to do with the price of oil, it's to do with the fact there's been 16 changes to the fiscal and tax regime round about the oil sector by the UK government in the last 10 years. So the tap has been turned on and off by the sector in terms of investment because of the complete inability of the UK government to give stability in terms of the tax regime. Now the Scottish government's undertaken to give that stability going forward, which means we'll see more stable investment profile from the industry going forward. Oil accounts for about 15% of Scotland's economy. It accounts for about 25 to 30% of Norway's economy, and Norway doesn't seem to have had any problems with that.
Really? You think it's a more stable environment? Because oil producers can go anywhere. They could go to Iraq, they could go to Nigeria, and if they know that you are absolutely dependent on oil, your bargaining position is...
Oil producers go where the oil is. It's as simple as that.
Yes, but it's a dwindling reserve in the North Sea, and if they know you're so dependent on oil, then they can hold you to ransom.
That's a fairly ridiculous argument. Again, if you look at the situation in Norway, where Norway's thrived with an average income per head in Norway double that of Scotland, and that's as a consequence of the fact that Norway's managed that resource correctly and the UK's completely failed to. Now, in terms of being a dwindling resource, in terms of the value, Katrina quoted some numbers there in terms of barrels of oil that are known to be there. So that excludes any future discoveries, be it in the west of Shetland fields or indeed in the Clyde Basin, where there are believed to be significant oil reserves that haven't been exploited because of the fact that there's nuclear submarines at fast lane that go through that waterway on a regular basis. So after independence, those areas open up to exploitation. But of course, the price of oil now is significantly higher than it was when oil was extracted in the beginning. So in value terms, more than half of the value of the oil is still to be extracted from the North Sea. And the question that people of Scotland have to ask themselves is, who do you trust to manage the second half of the oil bonanza? Do you want to give it to Westminster, or do you want the people of Scotland to manage that so that when the oil does run out in 40 or 50 years' time or more, we've actually made the investment in Scotland, reindustrialised the country, so we're in a better position to deal with that position going forward? Because the reality is, if you let Westminster manage that resource, then they'll dwindle it away in the same ways they did in Scotland in the 80s and 90s, and we'll have nothing to show for it in the future.
Looks set to be a feisty old debate tomorrow.
Absolutely. Thank
Ivan
you.
McKee, thank you very much.
Thank
Ivan
you.
McKee there from Business for Scotland.
But all the signs are that you people are frit and that you're stirring the fear pot, trying to frighten Scots into believing in some way they can't go it alone. This is desperation. So even you must be beginning to feel a bit ambivalent. I mean, the way in which the Scots are being talked about by outsiders is as if they were a third world country. The fact of the matter is it's a developed country which may or may not have the desire to go it alone. And if they want to go it alone, everybody in this country will find a way of working with an independent Scotland.
Look, for goodness sake, I haven't heard anyone talking about Scotland on those terms, frankly.
Well, what about Mr Barroso? What about Mr Cameron? What about Mr Osborne? All these people have been going up to Scotland or staying in a studio in London and telling the Scots they're not up to it. If you believe the polls, and you clearly do, then you would also believe the reality, which is that in the last 6 takings of any polls, they have been tight, but edging towards...
Yeah, a tiny bit, yes.
Yeah, well, that can grow into a bit of a landslide, and you people are panicking.
Oh, for goodness sake. And, you know, we will continue to mount a campaign that is strongly positive about the United Kingdom.